channel. Since we're recording, we ask for everyone to remain on mute the entire time. If for some reason you accidentally unmute, please don't be offended if we mute you. If you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to type them in the chat, and afterwards I'll read them to our speaker and we'll get those questions answered. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Katherine George. Katherine George is a painter currently residing in Memphis, Tennessee with her husband, Billy George, and their daughter, Zadie. She earned a BA in art history from Rhodes College in 2009. Following college, Katherine held positions in development and marketing while growing her art practice. When her daughter was born in 2018, she quit her job to devote herself to both caring for her child and fully committing to her art. Her work is most inspired by the variety of forms found on daily walks, the foliage, a glimpse into a neighbor's back garden, and the leafy shadows cast on the pavement. Katherine is especially drawn to the delicate appearance, implicit strength, and patient and confident growth of plant life. Katherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen. It's nice to see you all here. Let me see if I can get this going. Share screen, host disabled, participant screen sharing. Elizabeth, am I doing that wrong?
All right, I'll try again for screen share.
Okay.
Not sure what happened, but
I think that works. There we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for joining me today during your lunch. Let me see. It's always a treat to get to talk about art, and I'm especially honored that you're joining me to talk about my art today. The Dixon has become a really special place for me the past few years, and I was lucky enough to be included in the Memphis 2021 exhibit that was showing this summer. And so several of the pieces that I'll talk about today were in that exhibit, and I'd like to talk a little bit about what was kind of behind the decisions I made and what was involved in making that series, as well as some of my other work and my process and inspiration, and just a little bit of the play that's involved in my creative practice. Like I said, the Dixon has become a really important part to me and my family, especially in 2020 when everything was closed. My daughter and I almost weekly went to visit the garden. It was a safe place so we could be outside and romping around, and I could feel like I was getting some art inspiration, and she could explore and get, bits of the sights and smells and everything. So it's kind of like a home away from home for her. She always knows exactly where we're going when we jump in the car. So I had to share these images of her. And that is one thing, as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm very inspired by nature, as are many artists. And it's can be really a meditative experience when you visit a garden like the Dixon, even with a toddler in tow. One quote that really struck me was when I was watching a documentary about Frank Cabot's garden. He says, "Gardens have to do with sensuality. All of one's senses are involved and play an important role in one's reaction to a garden, and you seem to be in a different world. And the deeper you go, it's like you're in a different plane of existence." Now, that is not always the experience when you're walking around a garden, but it can be, and I'm sure some of you can relate to that meditative experience of being in nature. And so that is always striking to me, and I try to carry that a little bit into my art practice as well. This is an image of my studio, and you can see me in it as well. It is in my living room now. I used to have my own room to myself, but now I'm shoved into a corner of our living room. So my art practice it actually expands throughout our house. So it is always there. I cannot shut the door, which is a good and bad thing. But it is nice when I can just always review paintings and everything. So I just wanted to share and that. And then here are a few pieces that were in the Dixon show, the Memphis 2021 show in the summer and their earlier phases. The paintings often feature expansive planes of color, harmonious color palettes, and curved shapes paired with thin, straight lines. They're often described as clean and graphic and sharp. But they're also paired with that the organic shapes of the plant life, I think creates a nice juxtaposition. The central focus or main character of my paintings is usually various flora growing from ellipse-shaped portals. They're either sheltered under archways often, or protected by peeking behind walls, or seen through window or door openings. Sometimes they're in kind of these barren landscapes as well. For me, the theme present in my paintings focuses on the growth we seek, the paths we take, and the process of becoming. So there's growth waiting for us as we move through life, and we choose from the various paths we are presented or carve out for ourselves. And my aim is to really create an image that represents a point in that journey, with a promise of growth ahead. So here are two, we've got two plants. So on the left, I titled both of these pieces Protected Growth, and we've got kind of a partition wall protecting this flowering plant growing from a portal on the left-hand side. And then on the right, we have two lilies in full bloom growing from a pale yellow portal underneath an archway. So there's space to grow above, but the arch can also be seen as a transitional space, a space to pass through while still remaining sheltered and protected. And here we have Garden View, which is in the exhibit as well. There are two windows with lush foliage, and the view through each window is of course slightly different. But then there's abundant growth found in the space that is just beyond where the viewer is currently sitting. Oops. It looks like I can admit somebody. Oh, there we go. I'm drawn to the symbolism of the arch. I always have been, not only as a door or pathway, but as that protective transitional space. As I said before, architecturally, an arch not only offers the strength and support needed to create that large opening, but by doing so, it creates this lightness and open space. And I've always kind of liked that combination of the strength of the structural element enabling the openness and lightness to occur. So I've come to use the arch form in many of my paintings. This painting consists of 3 arches with a tree growing just beyond. The 3 arches for me represent multiple pathways. The space in the foreground, this pink space, you can remain in the foreground without passing through either doorway, but regardless of which doorway you were to pass through, there's growth waiting for you on the other side. Many of these pieces are acrylic on panel, but I also work on canvas and paper as well. And then here's a close-up of the tree growing from the portal. Rather than simply being rooted in the ground, I wanted to use a portal as possibly a door from maybe one world to another. As much as I want to express that growth requires personal bravery and action, I also feel there's some divine force involved. For me, that's what's on the other side of this portal, whether it's God, or some type of magic, a muse, kind of pushing you forward, inspiring you to create or calling you towards self-improvement. That's what I picture being on the other side of this portal, where that growth is sourcing from. This piece is titled Light-Filled Tunnel. It features 3 archways with some lush leafy plants growing just beyond each doorway as you walk, as if you were to walk through. So as you go through each path, there's growth there waiting for you, and there continues to be more down the line as well. And that's kind of what I wanted to communicate in this piece. This piece is titled Room to Grow. I'm sort of aiming to create kind of an otherworldly place in these landscapes. They're quite barren other than the central, structure of in this case, this hexagonal, kind of like a Colosseum-like structure and the large tree. I'm hoping to have a space that's maybe not in this real world, maybe a space outside of time. And when I think of a space outside of time, and for me, I think of people when they get in the zone, when they're painting, or maybe when they're exercising, whenever they're doing something that they're really into. So that's a little bit of what I'm have in the back of my mind while I'm painting these landscapes that are barren, but also very colorful. In this piece, I was considering the space and protection sometimes needed for growth. I know that we grow when we're faced with difficult circumstances and challenges, but there's also the stability and routine and security that is required for us to grow often. And then at the same time, there might be a kind of a barren period in your life, which is actually providing you with that room needed to grow. So that breathing room is also something I was thinking of when painting this piece. Also, I thought I'd share just a little bit about my process. Like many artists, I keep a sketchbook. I do not do very detailed sketches. It's usually just a way that I can quickly jot something down so that it doesn't leave my mind. As you can see on the left, my sketchbook has lots of question marks in it. So although this sketch ends up being quite similar to the piece I end up painting. So it's just a quick place to jot down ideas, and then I brainstorm the color and work that out in the execution. Source images, I have gotten some from the Dixon. There probably are some pictures in here from there. And then just also my neighborhood walks. Try to get out at least once a day if the weather permits, and often snapping pictures of just, the local plant life. On the left, we've got some lilies, which I used for inspiration for the piece I showed earlier. And then on the right is just some unknown vine that was on our hydrangeas, but I used that for a few pieces that have been made into prints. And this might be at the Dixon, actually. I'm really just drawn to the flattening of the shapes of the leaves. So when I see like an image on the left, I just want to boil it down to the simple lines of those leaves and shapes. And so I kind of look for plants that are positioned in a way that can help me capture that and recording later. There's another one. Dried plants really lend themselves well to what I'm looking for, that kind of flattening, so that you can see a lot of the negative space around each leaf that intrigues me as well, all those different forms made. And another part of my creative practice is making room for play. One of my favorite things to do when I need to get away from my typical work is to do collage work. It's just slightly different medium, whether it's these painted paper cutouts or, you know, attacking a magazine. I found that I think a lot less, especially because I'm not concerned with the end result and I don't have a plan. So that's a fun way for me to get out of my head. And that's usually my go-to. I also do embroidery sometimes too. Here is the result of some play. And I included these faces on the left I used to do for my warm-ups. And I shared them, I guess, on Instagram to the internet, and eventually they turned into an opportunity. So another reminder for me to continue to play. This piece was featured at Anthropology, which was an exciting thing, but so play is important and something good can come out of it too, even if you're just doing it for yourself. And these are some very different pieces. I do figurative work as well. And I wanted to include them to show kind of how my style has changed over the past few years. And I think that's most evident in my figurative pieces. In 2016 is when I really started getting more serious about my art practice. This is when I still had a full-time job in marketing. But as I developed my style over the years, it started becoming a little more abstract. And this is basically where my figurative work is now. I usually do these larger pieces as commission projects because they're so big. And my personal work is more focused on the plant pieces that I was discussing earlier. This is an earlier piece from 2019, featuring two kind of windowed arches, the pink grid. And again, I really do like to flatten out my trees and flowers to kind of emphasize the forms that are part of them, but also the negative space around them as well. Let's see what's next. That's another piece, I think, from 2019 as well. And so I thought I'd share a little bit about some of my inspiration points. Any creative person can get inspired by a whole range of things, but I've picked a few. These are two examples of Japanese woodblocks from the Edo period. My appreciation of Japanese woodblocks began when my mother first introduced me to them. When I was younger, she had a book of them, and as well as some Indian miniatures that are on my family's fireplace, which are really beautiful. And I just thought they were fascinating. You can just tell there's something different about, even as a kid, I recognized there was something different about the perspective and how things were being portrayed from the typical imagery I had been seeing up until then. So I really like that flattening of perspective that, again, I'm drawn to. And then the lack of shadow, it's just part of how they portray this kind of otherworldly place. The use of thin outlines is something I've integrated into my pieces as well, even though obviously it's a completely different medium. But I like to do that as well to emphasize the forms, or just to have an excuse to put another pop of color in there. Mary Cassatt also was heavily influenced by Japanese woodblock, and she did several pieces using the technique herself. And I really love her images, creating these moments of motherhood. I'm especially drawn to this piece with the very simple color palette, very simple image, but it's very touching. We've got that horizontal line in the background, grounding us, and I just think it's such a touching image. And I love that yellowy green as well. I've always loved ancient art. This piece, this Roman fresco from the wall, from the House of Livia, has been referenced in a few of my paintings. I think Three Arches is probably the first piece, and a few more. I love the long horizontal lines that go across the entire wall, creating just this really calm gardenscape. Another source of inspiration for me and the series overall, and just really my art practice, has been Molly Peacock's book, The Paper Garden, which is about Mary Delaney, who was an 18th century English aristocratic woman who invented mixed media collage as a medium. I really just have to mention her whenever I'm talking about my art practice, because she's kind of become a little bit of a role model to me. She helped me push through when I've had more challenging points. I always go back to that book when I need a little bit of a pep talk. So some of you may be familiar with this work. Here she is in her younger years, but really the picture on the right is when she was really creating most of her work. She created 985 illustrations of botanical specimens, about 100 a year, and these are fairly large pieces. Each element of this is a collage. It's painted paper that's then cut and glued together, even the tiniest little details. So she was very prolific, incredibly talented. I love how it is on the black ground. Oops. And so I just really admire this woman who came from obviously a completely different time and a different lifestyle. But what I took away from her life story is that I have my whole life to grow and develop as an artist. And as long as I'm physically able, I think I mentioned that she started working on these when she was 72 years old. I can create art every day, and that each chapter is part of the journey. And so I really try to keep that in mind in my art practice. It helps me be more present and to not rush and getting ahead of where I really need to be at the moment. And really just keep trusting that the growth is waiting for me. And that's kind of the message that's been in the back of my head for this series of the plants growing from the portals and the arches when I try to create. And also wanted to share this quote from Patti Smith in an interview I heard. If one has a calling, where does the calling come from? One can say from God, from nature, from some vast energy pool. Art for me has not been a godless pursuit. A human being is meant to be in perpetual becoming. And so that's another quote I kind of keep in the back of my mind when I'm working on this series. And with that, I thank you for joining me. Wasn't a very long talk. I'm happy to go back to some other pieces and discuss any of my work. If anyone has any questions about my process or anything like that.
All right. Thank you, Katherine. We do actually have our first question from Sue Walsh. How do you choose your color palette?
It comes from different things. There's definitely colors that I'm more drawn to, like for instance here, this darker green and more minty green combo, and this more of a chartreuse green that comes up in a lot of my work. But it might be from interior magazines or textiles, or just a scene I see and that strikes me, and maybe I'll pull in a few other colors. It really just depends. But yeah, anywhere really. But there's definitely several that I'm more drawn to, more periwinkle blues, lots of pinks lately. Trying to get a little bold as I go. I could probably do all my paintings in blue during some periods. I love color, and that has become more and more of an inspiration starting point for my pieces. Lately, I love to develop my expertise in color further, and so I've just slowly been working on that as well.
Thank you. Julie says, yeah, you were great about sharing your work on social media. What has your experience been like with that? Has it been positive?
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, it's definitely, I look at it as part of my job, and I'm definitely could be better about it. There's always artists out there that are more successful about that element, but I'm happy I continue doing it because it is what has brought a lot of opportunities my way without me having to seek them out. I used to have pieces featured at Serena and Lily, which is a large national brand. And then the work through Anthropology just came about from people finding me on Instagram. So just not overthinking it too much, but sharing as I go is part of it. And also being alone a lot of the time in your art practice, it kind of helps to have that bit of a social element to your work. But there are certainly times that I don't love the pressure of needing to keep up with that and to stay, visible. Although I'm sure that most people would not notice if I disappeared for several months, but but yes, it's been a positive thing overall.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. Kevin asks, I'm very impressed by the reserve of your work. In an increasingly noisy art world, how do you maintain your artistic equilibrium?
That is difficult because as someone who loves art, and I find myself, for example, on Instagram, I'd say 80% of the accounts I follow are art related. So, and I love going to museums and viewing art, and there is an inspiration overload. So I try to keep that in check, and just that is why it's helpful to keep my sketchbook. And so whenever I'm going to get down to work, I kind of go back into my hole, into my studio, and remember what my imagery is and what my, visual vocabulary is. And definitely try not to compare myself to others because, again, kind of like I was talking about earlier, my path is my path, and I'm kind of moseying along in my journey, and this is where I am now, and I know it'll develop along the road. I've come a long way. So yeah, just kind of putting my blinders on when it actually is time to get down to my studio practice. So I hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you. I have a question about your practice. You mentioned, you talked about your warm-up pieces, and the faces. I actually love the faces.
Oh yeah,
they're very expressive, considering that they're actually just kind of
lines. Yeah,
they're very expressive. So my question about that is, do you draw inspiration for your for those, or is it more freestyle, freehand, whatever pops into your head?
That's just more freehand, trying to, I mean, as you can see, my pieces are pretty stiff is a negative word to use, but precise. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I end up in the end anyway, but doing those looser lines, I don't know if I could find it, helps me loosen up when I am disciplined and actually do a warm up. Sometimes I just jump right in and don't do it. But yeah, just starting off by letting my hand move around and trying to loosen up my body in general.
Right. Thank you. One more question from me. You talked a little bit about the negative space in your art. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of negative space in your art?
So I feel like this, I don't think I've ever actually used this reference image on the left, but it is something that similar to others that I use. I've done a lot of pieces that are just black silhouettes of plant life, and where I'll take a reference image and sometimes I'll actually eliminate some of the leaves to make more room so that it's more simplified, more stylized. I don't know if it's more of like being really interested in folk art at some point, or more ancient art motifs or textiles, where things are much more stylized. But then also it's just something my eye enjoys, is the space that not only the leaf forms, but then all those spaces in between and those different shapes that you can find. I just enjoy exploring that and resting my eye there. So I don't know if I have a deeper reason as to why, other than just enjoying it aesthetically.
All right, thank you. All right, Kevin asked, please talk a bit more about the dialogue between built structures and the natural elements of your in your paintings. Is it an expression of your worldview about the planet?
No, but I love architecture, and at one point I did consider going to architecture school when I was kind of searching for what I wanted to do. And so I am more drawn to really just maybe simple modernist structures, with maybe vines growing up on the walls. I just like that juxtaposition of the man-made living in a harmony with nature, something that's a beautiful thing, not trying to say anything about a negative tension that's created by that. If anything, I'd like to portray maybe a tension that's a positive. I just love that wild organic form juxtaposed with the smooth planes of color and that make up the walls, like for example on this piece. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Question from Sue. How did your formal education impact your art, if it does?
A good bit. Having studied art history when I was in college, I was completely in love with studying art history, and my plan had been to, maybe eventually get my master's, hopefully work in museum or gallery environment. But I graduated in 2009. It was rough to get a job, and so I was lucky to find a job in higher education. And so art became something I enjoyed, on the weekends or at night for a little while. And then eventually, obviously I did fine art practice as part of my basic bachelor degree, but I never saw myself as an artist. But after taking a few night classes, I really realized that that's what I wanted to do, regardless of whether I felt I had natural ability in it or not. So I've just really embraced that. But I'm lucky to have had a solid art history education, which is I'm constantly trying to fill. It's always, of course, ongoing. But that definitely provides influences in my work. Some I can name, some people have to point out to me, but that has definitely fed my work as well. And it definitely has given me a language to work with as well, instead of just starting from zero.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, me, who can identify with the struggle of graduating college in 2009.
Oh, really? Yeah, it was a little rough.
There was a lot of rough for a lot of people.
But look at us now, we're doing fine.
We're doing great. So, are there any more questions for Katherine? Just give it a little. All right, just give it a little. We'll just give it a minute to see if anybody has any more questions.
Katherine, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. This was fun.
Really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Hey, Katherine, Kevin Sharp here. When's our next opportunity to see your work? Got any shows coming up?
Oh, actually, yes, this weekend, I'll be in Oxford. It's something they do annually. It's the one night stand show at the Ole Miss Motel. So there's a few Memphis artists. Francis Berry, who is also in the Memphis 2021 exhibit, is also
Right.
doing it. So we take over a motel room and transform it to an extent. And there'll be lots of people coming through. So that'll be this Saturday. And beyond
Awesome.
that, I'm just working on commissions. I've got a baby due in February, so trying to not bite off more than I can chew up until then.
Mhm.
Trying.
Well, congratulations on, well, on all your
All
good work, you know, including the new arrival.
Thank you.
And we loved having you in Memphis 2021. I really enjoyed getting to know your work better and getting to know you better. And I'm out of town this weekend, or I'd be down in Oxford.
Oh yeah, hey. It should be fun. It'll be nice to see some more art in person. That's always something that we're not doing, enough of these days. So it'll be a fun experience. Thank you.
Well, keep us posted where you're showing next. We're always
Okay,
interested.
I will. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Catherine.
All right,
We'll see
thanks
you
y'all.
soon.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. We really appreciate you coming to talk to our Munch and Learn group. So thank you for attending, everyone. Next week's program will be on conifers, and it will be with the Dixon's own Dale Skaggs. If you aren't currently a Dixon member, we invite you to renew or join. We'd be grateful to add your name to the list of members who help make the Dixon the special place it is. We invite you to come in person to the Dixon and see the Mallory Wurzburger exhibition by Philip R. Dotson. Have a great afternoon, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care. And again, thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
How do I stop sharing?